The crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council echoed with the chittering laughter of a dozen alien species. Ambassador Vel of the Thornian Collective gestured dismissively at the holographic display, showing human military formations, his 4 arms weaving in mockery. These creatures, Vel clicked, his mandibles vibrating with amusement. They call themselves soldiers? Look at them. No natural armor, no enhanced reflexes, no psionic abilities. They're barely evolved beyond their cave-dwelling ancestors. The assembled delegates erupted in fresh waves of laughter. Commander Thane of the Altarian Defense Corps, his blue-scaled head bobbing with mirth, added his voice to the chorus. I've seen their weapons specifications, chemical projectiles. In an age of plasma cannons and quantum disruptors, they still throw metal pellets at their enemies. Captain Jake Morrison stood rigidly at attention beside the holographic projector, his weathered face betraying no emotion despite the insults washing over him. The human delegation had been invited to present their military capabilities to the Galactic Alliance, a formality, really, since everyone knew humanity's role would be support services and logistics. Captain Morrison, Ambassador Vel's translator, crackled. Surely you understand that your species' contribution to our war effort against the Krex Empire will be limited. We appreciate Earth's enthusiasm, but warfare requires evolution, not desperation. Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, Ambassador, humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've learned a thing or two about survival. This triggered another wave of alien laughter. General Krix of the Zeteran war machine, his massive frame towering over the human captain, leaned forward with predatory interest. Survival? Captain, the Krex Empire commands fleets that blot out stars. They've conquered systems with populations in the trillions. Your entire species numbers barely 8 billion primitives on a single world. The Krex are different from anything your species has faced, added Admiral Nex of the Voidwalker fleet, her ethereal form shimmering with condescension. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they show no mercy. When they arrive, worlds burn. Civilizations that have stood for millennia crumble in days. Morrison nodded slowly. Then we'd better stop them. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Vel's antennae twitched with irritation. Stop them? Captain, your species couldn't stop a Krex scouting party, let alone their main force. We're being generous by allowing humans to participate at all. Indeed, General Krix rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. We've decided to assign your forces to rearguard duty. Supply lines, medical support, perhaps some basic reconnaissance. Leave the real fighting to species actually equipped for it. The human delegation exchanged glances. Morrison's second-in-command, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Davis, stepped forward. General, humans have never backed down from a fight. We may not have your technology, but we have something else. And what's that? Thane asked, his scales rippling with amusement. Heart, Davis replied simply. The chamber fell silent for a moment before erupting in the loudest laughter yet. Ambassador Vel wiped moisture from his compound eyes. Heart, oh that's precious. Tell me, Colonel, how does heart stop a plasma bombardment? How does it penetrate quantum shields? Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear, but recognition. He'd seen this before, in the eyes of enemies who thought they understood humans. They always learn too late. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-Fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe, it's free, and it helps us bring these front lines to you. You'll find out, Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying across the chamber with unsettling calm. When the Krex come, you'll understand what makes humans different. The laughter died away, replaced by uncomfortable silence. Something in the human captain's tone had changed, carrying an edge that made even the most battle-hardened aliens shift uneasily. Admiral Nex's form flickered with uncertainty. Captain, are you threatening us? No, Admiral, Morrison replied, his eyes never leaving the assembly. I'm making you a promise. When your advanced civilizations start crumbling, when your superior technology fails, when your enhanced soldiers run in terror, humans will still be fighting. Because that's what we do. We fight when there's no hope, We fight when we're outnumbered. And we fight when everyone else has given up. The silence stretched until Ambassador Vell finally spoke, his voice lacking its earlier mockery. Your forces will be assigned to Sector 7, protecting the supply convoys. Try not to get in our way when the real war begins. Morrison saluted crisply. Yes, sir, we'll be ready. As the human delegation filed out, none of the aliens noticed the slight smile playing at the corner of Morrison's mouth. They would learn soon enough that humans didn't just fight wars, they excelled at them in ways that defied all logic and reason. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came through the emergency communication channels 3 days later. Admiral Nex's voice crackled through the speakers in the human command post, her usual ethereal composure shattered by raw panic. All units, all units. The cracks have broken through the primary defensive line. Repeat, the cracks have broken through. They're moving faster than our projections indicated. Captain Morrison looked up from the tactical display where he'd been reviewing supply routes. Around him, the human command staff continued their work with practiced efficiency, but he could see the tension in their movements. They'd been expecting this call. Lieutenant Colonel Davis moved to Morrison's side, her expression grim. Sir, we're getting scattered reports from the front. It sounds like complete chaos out there. The communication channel erupted with overlapping voices, alien commanders screaming orders, desperate calls for reinforcement, and the distinctive whine of weapons fire. Through the static, Morrison could make out General Crix's booming voice, no longer filled with confidence. Zentaran forces are taking heavy casualties. These creatures fight like nothing we've ever encountered. They don't follow standard tactical doctrine. They're unpredictable, savage. Morrison keyed his communicator. General Crix, this is Captain Morrison. What's your status, Morrison? Crix's voice was strained, punctuated by explosions in the background. Your rear guard position is... It's secure? Affirmative, General. We're holding position in Sector 7, as ordered. Good, good. The Crux broke through using some kind of... I don't know what to call it. Berserker tactics? They absorbed massive casualties, but kept coming. Our predictive algorithms couldn't account for forces willing to take 90% losses to achieve an objective. Davis raised an eyebrow. Sounds familiar, she muttered. The tactical display updated with new intelligence, showing red markers spreading across the battlefield. Like a virus. The Crux advance was unlike anything the Galactic Alliance had faced. Not the methodical conquest of a technologically superior force, but the relentless surge of something primal and terrifying. Commander Thane's voice cut through the chatter, high-pitched with terror. They're not just killing our soldiers, they're hunting them. The Crux are pursuing individual units, tracking them down like prey. This isn't warfare, it's slaughter. Morrison studied the battle reports flowing across his screen. The Crux Empire's reputation for brutality wasn't exaggerated, but their tactics were revealing something the Alliance had missed. They weren't just technologically advanced, they were apex predators, who understood warfare on a level that most civilized species had forgotten. Sir, Sergeant Major Rodriguez called from the communication station. We're receiving multiple distress signals from forward positions. The Altarian Defense Corps is requesting immediate evacuation support. Evacuation? Morrison frowned. They're retreating? More like running, sir. The reports are disturbing. The Crux aren't just defeating our forces, they're systematically eliminating them. No prisoners, no quarter given. The holographic display updated again, showing the collapse of the Alliance's carefully planned defensive formations. In less than 6 hours, a front that was supposed to hold for weeks had crumbled completely. Ambassador Vell's voice joined the chaotic chatter, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate pleading. All ships, all ships. The Thornian Collective is abandoning the forward bases. Repeat, we are in full retreat. The Crux are moving toward the supply lines. Morrison's blood ran cold. The supply lines, that was their sector. The aliens had placed humanity's forces in what they thought was the safest position, never imagining that their own failure would put humans directly in the path of the Crux advance. Colonel Davis, Morrison said quietly, get me a full tactical assessment of our position. I want to know every choke point, every defensive position, every possible route the Krex might take. Sir, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Morrison nodded grimly. The Alliance forces are broken. Someone needs to buy them time to regroup, and we're the only ones positioned to do it. The communication channel exploded with a new voice. General Krex, his earlier composure completely shattered. The Krex have broken through the secondary lines. They're moving toward the supply corridors. All units in Sector 7, evacuate immediately. Repeat, evacuate immediately. Morrison looked around his command post at the faces of his officers. These were professional soldiers, veterans who'd seen combat on dozens of worlds. They knew what the order meant, and they knew what Morrison was about to do. Sir, Davis said. Softly, the evacuation order is clear. We should fall back with the rest of the Alliance forces. Morrison studied the tactical display one more time. The Krex were advancing along 3 main corridors, but there was a natural choke point at the Krenin Pass, where the terrain would force them to concentrate their forces. If someone could hold that position, even for a few hours, it might give the Alliance time to reorganize. Colonel, Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of command, cancel the evacuation order. We're staying. The command post fell silent. Everyone understood the implication. They were about to face an enemy that had just crushed the combined might of the Galactic Alliance. Morrison keyed his communicator to the general channel. This is Captain Morrison to all Alliance forces. Human units are taking position at the Krenin Pass. We'll hold the line while you regroup. Ambassador Vel's voice crackled through the static. Morrison, you can't be serious. The Krex will overwhelm you in minutes. Morrison's smile was cold as winter. We'll see about that, Ambassador. Humans have a saying when the going gets tough. The tough get going. You're about to learn what that means. The Krenin Pass cut through the mountains like a wound in the landscape, its narrow confines flanked by steep cliffs that rose into the perpetual mist. Captain Morrison stood at the northern edge of the pass, studying the terrain with the practiced eye of a soldier who'd learned to read ground like a book. Behind him, his forces worked with desperate efficiency to prepare their defenses. How many, Colonel? Morrison asked without turning around. Lieutenant Colonel Davis consulted her tactical display. 537 humans, sir. That includes support staff, medics, and engineers. We've got basic defensive equipment, standard projectile weapons, and about 6 hours of heavy ammunition. Morrison nodded grimly. The latest intelligence reports estimated the Krex advance force at 27,000 combat troops, supported by armor and air cover. 50-1 odds against an enemy that had just shattered the Alliance's best forces. Sir, Sergeant Major Rodriguez jogged up, his weathered face streaked with sweat and grime. The engineers have finished mining the pass entrance. We've got shape charges placed at strategic points, but it'll only slow them down. Every second counts, Sergeant Major. What about the defensive positions? Dug in as best we can, sir. The men are using the old playbook interlocking fields of fire, kill zones, fallback positions. It's not pretty, but it's effective. Morrison allowed himself a slight smile. The old playbook was something the advanced alien civilizations had long since abandoned, brutal, primitive tactics that relied on terrain, psychology, and sheer bloody-minded determination. The kind of warfare that had forged humanity through millennia of conflict. The communication channel crackled to life with Admiral Nex's voice, now barely recognizable through the static and panic. Morrison, the Krex advance scouts are approaching. Your position. You need to evacuate immediately. Negative, Admiral. We're holding position. You don't understand. Nex's voice rose to a shriek. They're not just soldiers, they're monsters. They don't feel pain. They don't fear death, and they don't stop coming. The Thornian Collective's best warriors lasted 12 minutes against them. Morrison keyed his communicator to the human command frequency. All units, this is actual. The Krex are coming, and by all accounts, they're everything the Alliance forces said they were. Tough, brutal, and relentless. He paused, looking out over the pass where his soldiers had transformed the landscape into a maze of defensive positions. But here's the thing, they've never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of when we're backed into a corner. They don't know about Thermopylae, or Stalingrad, or the Alamo. They're about to get an education. Private Williams, barely old enough to shave, looked up from the machine gun position he was helping to fortify. "Sir, what if we can't stop them?" Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Son, stopping them isn't the point. The point is making them pay such a price that they'll remember this day for the rest of their lives. When they tell stories about their conquest of the galaxy, they'll whisper about the humans who held the pass." The first Krek scouts appeared at the southern mouth of the pass, tall reptilian creatures, moving with predatory grace. Their armor was black as midnight, decorated with trophies from their victories. Even at a distance, Morrison could see why they'd terrified the Alliance forces. "Contact," whispered Corporal Lee from the forward observation post. "Multiple bogies moving in formation. They're bigger than the intelligence report suggested." Morrison raised his binoculars. The Kreks were impressive specimens, each one standing nearly 8 feet tall, with muscular builds that spoke of genetic optimization for warfare. Their weapons were sleek and deadly, far more advanced than anything in the human arsenal. "Sir," Davis said quietly, "the Alliance forces are monitoring our communications. They're watching to see what happens." Morrison nodded. He could imagine the alien commanders huddled around their displays, waiting to see how quickly the primitive humans would break. Some probably had wagers on how long they'd last. The Krek scouts began to advance into the pass, their movements careful and professional. Morrison had to admire their discipline. They weren't charging blindly into unknown territory. They were taking their time, probing for weaknesses, assessing the human positions. "Let them come," Morrison murmured. "Let them think they understand what they're facing." The lead Krek scout stepped on the first pressure plate. The explosion that followed wasn't particularly large by modern standards, a simple chemical charge that would barely register on an alien scanner. But the psychological effect was immediate and devastating. The scout's scream echoed through the pass, a sound that chilled the blood of every human who heard it. It wasn't just pain, it was surprise, outrage, and something else: fear. "First blood to the humans," Rodriguez observed with grim satisfaction. The remaining Krek scouts began to advance more cautiously, their weapons raised and ready. Morrison watched them probe the minefield, their movements now hesitant and uncertain. The Alliance forces had described the Kreks as fearless, but Morrison could see the lie in that assessment. They weren't fearless, they were simply accustomed to technological superiority. "All units," Morrison said softly into his communicator, "remember your training. Make every shot count. Give them something to remember." The Krek's advance force crested the ridge at the southern mouth of the pass, and Morrison felt his breath catch. There were thousands of them, moving in perfect formation, their weapons glinting in the alien sunlight. It was an awesome sight, the kind of military display that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. But Morrison had seen worse odds before, in different wars on different worlds. The numbers didn't matter as much as the terrain, the preparation, and the will to fight. And humans, he reflected, had never lacked for will. "Sir," Williams called from his machine gun position, "they're beautiful, aren't they? In a terrifying sort of way." Morrison nodded. "They are, son. But beauty doesn't stop bullets." The Kreks began their advance into the pass, and Morrison felt the familiar calm that came before battle. This was what humans were made for, not the sterile warfare of advanced civilizations, but the raw, bloody business of survival. "Here they come," he said quietly. "Remember, boys, we're not just fighting for the Alliance. We're fighting for the right to be taken seriously. Let's show them what Earth's war dogs can do." The first wave of Krek's warriors entered the pass with the confidence of conquerors, their formation tight and disciplined. Morrison watched them advance through his scope, noting their tactical precision and the casual way they carried their advanced weapons. These were soldiers who had never known defeat. That was about to change. "Fire," Morrison said quietly into his communicator. The human defensive positions erupted in a coordinated symphony of destruction. Machine guns chattered from concealed positions, rifle fire cracked from the cliffs, and mortar began dropping shells into the Krek's formation with devastating accuracy. The effect was immediate and shocking. The Kreks, accustomed to engaging enemies at long range with energy weapons, found themselves caught in a crossfire of primitive kinetic projectiles that their shields couldn't fully deflect. The lead ranks stumbled and fell, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos, but they recovered quickly. Morrison had to admire their professionalism as they adapted to the unexpected threat, seeking cover and returning fire with plasma bolts that carved chunks from the rocky walls. Phase 2, Morrison ordered. The engineers detonated the secondary charges, bringing down sections of the cliff face and creating obstacles that forced the Kreks to funnel into predetermined kill zones. The aliens' superior technology meant nothing when they couldn't deploy it effectively. "Sir," Davis reported from her position, "the Kreks are adapting faster than expected. They're using their energy weapons to clear the rockfall." Morrison nodded. He'd expected that. The Kreks were intelligent enemies who would learn from their mistakes. But humans had been fighting intelligent enemies for millennia, and they'd learned a few tricks of their own. "Rodriguez, initiate psychological warfare protocol." The sergeant major grinned fiercely. "With pleasure, sir." Hidden speakers throughout. The past began broadcasting sounds that no civilized species would think to weaponize. The howls of wolves, the screams of ancient human warriors, and underneath it all, the steady rhythm of war drums. The psychological effect on the Kreks was immediate and profound. Morrison watched through his scope as the alien warriors began to show signs of unease. Their movements became more erratic, their formations less precise. They were hearing something that spoke to primal fears buried deep in their evolutionary memory. "That's it," Morrison murmured. "You're not fighting a civilized enemy anymore. You're fighting something that crawled out of the darkness and learned to kill." The Kreks commander, identifiable by his elaborate armor and the way the other warriors deferred to him, barked orders in his alien tongue. The formation began to adapt again, but Morrison could see the uncertainty in their movements. "Williams," Morrison called to the young private, "what do you see?" The kid peered through his scope, his face pale but determined. "They're scared, sir. I can see it in the way they move. They don't understand what's happening." Morrison felt a surge of pride. Williams was learning to read the battlefield, to see beyond the obvious and understand the psychology of warfare. "That's right, son. Fear is a weapon, just like any other. Use it." The Kreks began their second assault, this time with heavy weapons support. Energy cannons carved through the human defensive positions, and Morrison watched as good soldiers died defending their improvised fortifications. But for every human who fell, 3 Kreks warriors paid the price. "Sir," Davis reported, "we're taking heavy casualties. The medical stations are overwhelmed." Morrison nodded grimly. This was the cost of warfare, not just the tactical calculations, but the human price paid in blood and sacrifice. But the reports coming through the Alliance communication channels told a different story. "Morrison," Admiral Nex's voice crackled through the static, "the Kreks' advance has stalled. They're not moving beyond your position. What are you doing to them?" Morrison keyed his communicator. "We're fighting, Admiral. Something your people seem to have forgotten how to do." The third Kreks assault came with air support sleek atmospheric fighters that dove through the pass, strafing the human positions with plasma fire. Morrison watched his carefully prepared defenses crumble under the assault, but he also noticed something else. The Kreks ground forces were hanging back, waiting for the air support to clear the way. They were fighting like a civilized military force, following doctrine and minimizing casualties. They hadn't yet understood that they were facing an enemy that didn't follow the rules. "All units," Morrison broadcast on the human command frequency, "remember your training. When the enemy has air superiority, you take it away from them." The human soldiers began firing at the Kreks aircraft with their primitive projectile weapons, an action that should have been completely ineffective. But the pilots hadn't expected to face ground fire, and the psychological impact of bullets bouncing off their canopies was devastating. One of the fighters, spooked by the unexpected resistance, clipped a cliff face and crashed in a spectacular explosion. The remaining pilots began flying higher, their effectiveness greatly reduced. "Sir," Rodriguez reported with satisfaction, "the Kreks are requesting reinforcements. They're calling for additional air support and heavy artillery." Morrison felt his heart sink. More reinforcements meant more casualties, more impossible odds. But he also felt something else, a fierce joy that came from knowing they were making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. "How long have we been fighting?" Morrison asked. Davis checked her chronometer. 4 hours, 17 minutes, sir. 4 hours. The Thornian Collective's best warriors had lasted 12 minutes. The Altarian Defense Corps had broken in less than an hour. But humans, primitive, technologically inferior humans, had held for 4 hours against impossible odds. "Sir," Williams called from his position, "they're massing for another assault. This one looks bigger." Morrison looked out over the pass, now scarred by battle and littered with the wreckage of both sides. His forces were down to less than 200 effective soldiers, and ammunition was running critically low. But they were still fighting, still making the Krex pay for every meter of ground. "All units," Morrison said into his communicator. "The enemy is about to learn something that every human soldier knows by heart. When you're outnumbered, outgunned, and backed into a corner, you don't surrender. You fight harder." The Krex began their final assault, and Morrison watched them come with the calm of a man who had found his purpose. They would break through eventually, the numbers made that inevitable. But they would remember this day, and they would remember the humans who had shown them what real warfare looked like. "For humanity," Morrison said quietly, and opened fire. The final Krex assault broke against the human defensive positions like a wave against a seawall. Morrison watched through his scope as the alien warriors poured through the pass, their superior numbers finally overwhelming the carefully prepared kill zones. But something had changed in the way they fought. The casual confidence was gone, replaced by grim determination and barely controlled fear. "Sir," Davis reported, her voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders, "we're down to our last ammunition reserves." "The men are fixing bayonets," Morrison nodded. Bayonets, the most primitive weapon imaginable in an age of energy weapons and quantum disruptors. But there was something about the sight of humans preparing for hand-to-hand combat that sent a visible shudder through the Krex ranks. "Let them come," Morrison said. "If they want this pass, they'll have to take it from our cold, dead hands." The Krex commander, his elaborate armor now scarred and blackened from battle, raised his weapon and barked an order. The assault intensified. Plasma bolts carving through the remaining human positions with devastating effect. But the humans didn't break. They fell back from position to position, making the Krex pay for every meter of ground. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with grenades. When the grenades were gone, they fought with knives and bare hands. Private Williams, the young soldier who had asked about stopping the Krex, stood at Morrison's side with blood streaming down his face and his rifle long since discarded. In his hands he held a combat knife that gleamed with alien blood. "Sir," Williams said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I understand now. We're not trying to win. We're trying to teach them something." Morrison felt a surge of pride. The boy had learned the most important lesson of all, that victory wasn't always about defeating the enemy. Sometimes it was about making them understand the price of conquest. The communication channel crackled to life with voices from across the galaxy. Admiral Nex, her ethereal form now somehow more solid and determined. "Morrison, the Alliance forces are regrouping. Your sacrifice has bought us the time we needed." "Commander Thane," his voice filled with something that might have been awe, "the Krex advance has stalled across all fronts. They're calling for reinforcements, but their commanders are hesitant to commit. What did you do to them?" Morrison keyed his communicator one last time. "We showed them what humans are capable of when you push us too far. We showed them that technology and numbers don't mean everything." The Krex were within 50 meters now, their weapons trained on the final human positions. Morrison could see the fear in their eyes, not fear of death, but fear of an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. "All units," Morrison broadcast, "it's been an honor serving with you. Remember, we're not just soldiers, we're the inheritors of 10,000 years of human warfare. Every warrior who ever stood against impossible odds is with us today." The final assault began, and Morrison raised his sidearm to meet it. But something unexpected happened. The Krex advance faltered, their perfect formation wavering as reports flooded in from across the battlefield. "Sir," Davis gasped, "the Alliance forces are launching a counterattack. They're using our tactics guerrilla." Warfare, psychological operations, close-quarters combat. The Kreks don't know how to respond. Morrison felt his heart leap. The aliens had learned something from watching the humans fight, not just tactics, but the will to fight when everything seemed hopeless. General Krix's voice boomed across the communication channel. The Zentaran war machine is advancing on all fronts. The Kreks are falling back, they're actually retreating. The impossible had happened. The Kreks Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, were being pushed back by an alliance that had learned to fight like humans. Ambassador Vel's voice crackled. Through the static, no longer condescending but filled with genuine respect. Captain Morrison, the Galactic Council is unanimous in its decision. Humanity will be granted full membership in the Alliance, with command authority over all military operations. Morrison looked around at his surviving soldiers, barely 50 humans, who had held against impossible odds and changed the course of galactic history. They were bloodied, exhausted, and outnumbered, but they were still standing. "Sir," William said, his young face now bearing the mark of a veteran, "what happens now?" Morrison holstered his weapon and looked out over the pass, where the Kreks were indeed falling back, their retreat covered by increasingly desperate rearguard actions. The Alliance forces were advancing, but they were advancing like humans, aggressively, relentlessly, with a fury that the Kreks had never encountered before. "Now, son, we teach the galaxy how to fight a real war." The communication channel erupted with reports from across the front. The Kreks Empire, faced with an enemy that refused to fight by their rules, was crumbling. Their technological superiority meant nothing against opponents who had learned to embrace the chaos and brutality of warfare. "Morrison," Admiral Nex's voice carried a note of wonder. "The Kreks are requesting a ceasefire." "They want to negotiate," Morrison smiled grimly. "Tell them they can negotiate with the Galactic Council. But remind them that humans will be sitting at that table, and we don't negotiate from positions of weakness." The Battle of Krenin Pass entered galactic history as the day the tide turned against the Kreks Empire. But more than that, it was the day that humanity proved its worth to the galaxy, not through technology or superior numbers, but through the one thing that no amount of advancement could replicate: the human spirit. As the sun set over the pass, Morrison stood among his soldiers and watched the Alliance forces advance. They moved with new confidence, new purpose, and new understanding of what it meant to fight for something worth dying for. The galaxy had learned that humans weren't just another species to be tolerated or dismissed. They were warriors forged in the fires of 10,000 years of conflict, and they had come to teach the universe what real strength looked like. The Kreks Empire would eventually be defeated, but that was just the beginning. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and it was a place that would be remembered for generations to come. They had laughed at human troops. They wouldn't make that mistake again.